Good afternoon. Happy Father's Day. My name is Brad Kraft, and I'm a bookseller here at the University Bookstore. I know of only one song for Father's Day, as sung by the great Groucho Marx. Today, Father is Father's Day, and we're giving you a tie. It's not much we know, it is just our way of showing you we think you're a regular guy. You say it was nice of us to bother, but it really was a pleasure to fuss. For, according to our mother, you're our father, and that's good enough for us. Yes, that's good enough for us. Second verse. Today, Father is Father's Day, a day that we all revere. The tie that you got didn't cost such a lot, but we'll give you the same tie next year. You tell us it was nice of us to bother, but it really was a pleasure to fuss. For they say a child can only have one father, and you are the one for us. Yes, you are the one for us. Apologies for the singing. Likewise, dads get short shrift in literature. A quick review of the classics tells a similarly sorry tale. David Copperfield, Sr., James Potter, father of Harry, Mr. Auden, father of the Boxcar Children, etc. Dead dads. Violent or abusive dads. Abraham, Pap Finn, Prince Nikolai Andreevich Bolkonsky, King Lear, Michael Henchard, aka the Mayor of Casterbridge, Jack Torrance from The Shining, Lieutenant Colonel Wilbur Bull Meacham of the Great Santini, Heathcliff, look it up, etc. There are useless dads. Mr. Bennett, be honest. Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, Walter Morell of Sons and Lovers, Harry Rabbit Angstrom, etc. And there are absent fathers. Mr. March, the father of the Little Women, Odysseus, Mr. Pevensey of the Narnia books, and Mrs. P as well, come to that. To be honest, the good ones make for a depressingly short list. Atticus Finch, Natch, Bob Cratchit, Arthur Weasley, T.S. Garp, sort of, Charles Pa Engels, Père Goriot, though, spoiler alert, he comes to a sad end. William Robinson of the Swiss Family, same. And nearly all the other admirable dads are adoptive. Horton, he hatched that egg, don't forget. Silas Marner, Jean Valjean, Joe Gargery, Squire Allworthy. By no means a comprehensive survey, but there we are. Top of my head. It can be a little disheartening, then, looking for dads in literature with which to celebrate Father's Day. Mothers, by comparison, are easy, Medea and courage aside. One would think, what with the straight white male having had such a heyday for so long in the history of Western lit, that more dads might have been kinder to their own. But no. Many a poet addresses his little child, as in A Lullaby by Thomas Dekker, attributed. Golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles awake you when you rise. Or another by Blake, sweet smiles in the night hover over my delight. But when it comes to the poet being father to the child, you have to go a bit further afield to find something less obviously sentimental, as in this by Su Tung Po, or Su Shi, he's known by both. The poem is called On the Birth of His Son. Families, when a child is born, want it to be intelligent. I, through intelligence, having wrecked my whole life, only hope the baby will prove ignorant and stupid. Then he will crown a tranquil life by becoming a cabinet minister. More reverently, I would offer the following from one of America's first good poets, and Bradstreet. It's called To Her Father with Some Verses. Most truly honored and as truly dear, if worth in me or aught I do appear, who can of right better demand the same than may your worthy self from whom it came? The principal might yield a greater sum, yet handled ill amounts to but this crumb. My stock so small I know not how to pay, my bond remains in force unto this day. Yet for part payment take this simple mite. Where nothing's to be had, kings loose their right. Such is my debt, I may not say forgive, but as I can, I'll pay it while I live. Such is my bond, none can discharge but I. Yet paying is not paid until I die. Here's another lovely tribute from the great Irish poet, Seamus Heaney. It's called Follower. My father worked with a horse plow. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. The horses strained at his clicking tongue. An expert, he would set the wing and fit the bright steel-pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking. At the head rig, with a single pluck of reins, the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled in his hobnailed wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I wanted to grow up and plow, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always, but today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. One need not grow up on a farm to recognize that good man with a boy on his back. And that, it seems to me, is what poets do so much better than the rest of us, is it not? To be put in the place of both poet and subject, father and child, past and present. Here's another by the American poet William Stafford. Listening. My father could hear a little animal's step, or a moth in the dark against the screen, and every far sound called the listening out into places where the rest of us had never been. More spoke to him from the soft wild night than came to our porch for us on the wind. We would watch him look up, and his face would go keen, till the walls of the world flared, widened. My father heard so much that we still stand inviting the quiet by turning the face, waiting for a time when something in the night will touch us too from that other place. Daughters know this man as well, and that he comes from anywhere to right here and now. Here's Naomi Shihab Nye in a poem called My Father and the Fig Tree. For other fruits my father was indifferent. He'd point at the cherry trees and say, "See those? I wish they were figs." In the evenings he sat by our beds, weaving folk tales like vivid little scarves. They always involved a fig tree. Even when it didn't fit, he'd stick it in. Once, Yoha was walking down the road, and he saw a fig tree. Or, he tied his camel to a fig tree and went to sleep. Or, later when they caught and arrested him, his pockets were full of figs. At age 6, I ate a dried fig and shrugged. That's not what I was talking about, he said. I'm talking about a fig, straight from the earth, gift of Allah, on a branch so heavy it touches the ground. I'm talking about picking the largest, fattest, sweetest fig in the world and putting it in my mouth. Here he'd stop and close his eyes. Years passed. We lived in many houses. None had fig trees. We had lima beans, zucchini, parsley, beets. Plant one, my mother said. But my father never did. He tended garden half-heartedly, forgot to water, let the okra get too big. What a dreamer he is. Look how many things he starts and doesn't finish. The last time he moved, I had a phone call. My father, in Arabic, chanting a song I'd never heard. What's that? He took me out to the new yard. There, in the middle of Dallas, Texas, a tree with the largest, fattest, sweetest figs in the world. It's a fig tree song, he said, plucking his fruits like ripe tokens, emblems, assurance of a world that was always his own. May the fruits of all our fathers be so sweet. All the poems I've read, by the way, can be found in Fatherhood, Poems About Fathers, a lovely little anthology from the Everyman's Library Pocket Poets series. There it is. They also do another series I've also been collecting since it started, Everyman's Pocket Classics, short stories, also exquisitely made, these books, also affordable. The following comes from Stories of Fatherhood. It's a beautiful collection. Now, I would note, it's possible that so far in this reading I've been a bit unfair to the practitioners of prose. While it's true that the following falls into more than one of the dad categories with which I began, see if you can fill in the Venn diagram when I'm done, I do think the following may be my favorite story in the book. It happens to be one of my favorite novelists, Jim Sheppard. Note the language here is adult. Pour yourself something strong and settle in, maybe let the kids leave. Reading a story like this aloud, I find, at least for this reader, reminds me just what a remarkable, even uniquely perfect form short story can be, to convey emotion, to amuse, to amaze. Jim Sheppard's amazing. Don't know that I can do this full justice, but anyway, here we go. The story is called The Mortality of Parents by Jim Sheppard. It's 1970. He's the glue that holds us together. The UN van pelted with rocks and bottles. The pro wrestling ref floored by the occasional drop kick, but always gamely back on his feet and working to keep the eye gouging to a minimum. Morning in and morning out, my father's up and has the coffee made and is reasonably ready for whatever we're about to, in our misery and impatience and bell-jar self-absorption, dish out. Ours is not one of those families in which the tensions are played out in intricately subterranean gestures. My brother has thrown me across the living room so that my back impacted the wall above the sofa. To more fully demonstrate his dissatisfaction with the general drift of our family life, in our presence he's upended the dining room table, fully set, a massive shaker cherry rectangle with big cross-beamed legs. My mother has slung a just-filled humidifier across the length of the kitchen. The water reservoir's rubber-sealed cap ricocheted off the ceiling. I've been known to run full bore at the walls, all shoulders and elbows, the hero in a movie breaking down doors where no doors are evident. Our plaster is patched with football-sized ovals. The trim is scissored with scuff marks. Homicidal or suicidal exasperation is the norm. As Life magazine reminds us every so often, it's a time of great uncertainty. In each case, our attempts at self-expression are diverted by Shep into channels at least eventually more acceptable to the neighbors. He reasons, he pleads, he cajoles, he throws people around. The fact that we're still standing is incontrovertible evidence that he gets results. I've put the leg of a serving table through the speaker on our console television from across the room during a football game. My mother has snapped an oar. A kid's oar from a plastic boat, but an oar nonetheless, around a cross-beam support in the basement when I ducked and wove while she was trying to apply a two-handed lesson. My brother has cleared our driveway from his second-story window with his turntable when the thing still made vocalists sound vaguely quaaluded after the third straight trip to the repair shop. So, there it is. The big, broad granite slab perpendicular to our slippery slope, dug in at the bottom of an increasingly steep drop. What's going to happen when Shep dies? We're going to go head-on smash into it sometime soon. He's 59 and not the healthiest guy in the world in 1970, and none of us, including him, are anywhere in the neighborhood of being prepared. So what is going to happen? At all of 14 years old, I managed to think about it incessantly without enlightening myself on the matter. I don't know. I don't know because I don't want to know. In our family, we're either screaming or breaking things or cleaning up. Who has time for hypotheticals? Everyone calls him Shep. He's been Shep since the dawn of time. I apparently started calling him Shep when I was 3, amusing visiting relatives and friends. My mother only became Ida when I was 13 or so. He has his faults. For the sake of everyone concerned in social situations, we don't get my mother started on his faults. But in 1970, for the 14 years I've been alive and the 10 that I've been sentient, he's been for me the epitome of good. Good being defined as patient and or generous in his dispensation of care. Nowhere in my world do I know anyone as doggedly resourceful in his desire to do what he can for others. Though my mother, when she overhears relatives marveling at how often her husband thinks of others, works to make clear that by others we all mean his 2 sons, me being one. By 1970, she's long been of the opinion that she gets a raw deal when it comes to conflicts with her sons, and as far as her sons are concerned, she's right. Shep's mode with her is only a slightly amended version of a position he's taken from the very beginning. They're just kids. But you should know better. Our lives are divided into ongoing topics of contention. What do we fight about? Everything. My father has gone on record as believing we could fuck up a wet dream. Some subjects seem to roll out the ordnance more reliably than others, though. In ascending order of seriousness. Number 1, music. My mother inclines toward Jimmy Roselli and Lou Monti, singers so Italian they embarrass even other Italian singers. My father favors Nelson Eddy and Earl Wrightson, booming-voiced guys who sound as though they only sing in Mountie uniforms. Passing the stereo, they turn each other's music down or off. My brother and I crack each other up regularly by making fun of both oeuvres. He favors vandalizing my mother's Scungili favorites. Please, Mr. Columbus, turn it a ship around. I get a bang out of replicating on car rides that basso pretentious sound my father so enjoys. Give me 10 men that are stout-hearted men. Music generates the most benign of our free-for-alls. My father gives as good as he gets when it comes to heaping abuse on what he hears. He's caustic on the subject of Janis Joplin. He periodically suggests a saliva test for Joe Cocker. He refers to Jimi Hendrix only as that banshee, but when he can make out the lyrics, and they're witty, as in the case of the Kinks or Randy Newman, every so often, from down below in the living room, our stuff can get a laugh. Number 2, drinking. Shep puts it away like he has a hollow leg, and the volume annoys my mother mostly because of the insulation it seems to provide. Maybe because he brushed by alcoholism so closely himself, and certainly because he's had so many good friends who've taken that easy slide into the pool. The best man at his wedding died of cirrhosis of the liver. His comedy is particularly blunt on this subject, which, for Shep, is saying something. She was a jug artist, he'll say. He was always face down in the sauce somewhere. For spiffy events, my mother drinks whiskey sours. When she thinks she's getting a cold, she may take the occasional shot of $4 brandy or rye. Her favorite drink is Thunderbird. Wine of choice for winos, screw-topped and so cheap that it seems a bargain even to her. It smells so awful that I begin making fun of it when my age is still in the single digits. It tastes like something from a crankcase. It's good enough for me, my mother always says in response, which brings us to number 3, money. Money dictates our Children of the Depression parents' mantra, the bottom line creed by which they live. It's good enough for me. Restaurants with linen napkins are too fancy. A big car or a new car is more than we need. Vacation somewhere other than a dank, knotty pine cabin on Lake Champlain would be very nice if money meant absolutely nothing to us and was pouring in at an unprecedented rate. In Beloit, Wisconsin, years later, traveling on my own, I come across a marketing strategy apparently designed for my parents. A billboard that reads Miller, because Budweiser is just too darned expensive. All expenses and bills, for whatever amount, irk Ida. All charges of whatever size seem fair to Shep. Ida's expression will darken after having opened an electric bill of 17 cents. While Shep's face will remain unperturbed, watching a cashier ring up a wiffle bat for $21.95. Without waiting for birthdays or holidays, Shep spreads his money around like Diamond Jim Brady. He could spend $20 on a trip to the dump. He buys the boys smallish things, $4 models, $5 albums, that the boys have agitated for, while Ida does her best to save, hating her role as the bad cop who always gets to suggest that the boys can wait. We're encouraged to hide gifts when arriving back home, but Ida checks all incoming packages like a customs agent. Fights follow. We sit up in our room, enjoying our new whatevers, while in the arena below, the insults escalate in volume. Sometimes we go downstairs for a drink in the middle of it all. Nobody asks, but privately we take Shep's side, while intuiting guiltily that Ida's probably right. Then there are the topics of more serious fights, the length of the boy's hair, the Dean Martin celebrity roasts, my brother's refusal to go to school, relatives, my brother in general, me. By 1970, my brother and I have put in a staggering 31 combined years with Shep and Ida in our household. And time with Shep and Ida in our household is the analog to spending time with Henny Youngman and Anna Magnani in Beirut. My brother and I don't have a lot of advanced training in this area, but even we sense that as far as our parents' emotional lives go, there are compatibility and empathy issues that are not being properly addressed. Certain goals that are not being met. All of this would have sailed along with its own kind of stability, the way events sailed along from Shiloh to Antietam to Fredericksburg in 1862. But in August of 1970, my father had the first of his 3 heart attacks. As far as my mother was concerned, his heart had always been the problem. His heart was too big. His heart was too good. His heart was the problem. His heart was evidently listening. By the time I was 14 and my brother was 17 in 1970, we've provided my father with a string of unprecedented opportunities to confirm his status with relatives and friends as the biggest worrier they've ever known. At my brother's suggestion, I've taken a wagon down the steepest paved hill in a 500-mile radius and landed on my face. We've both been caught jumping off the roof of our neighbor's house in an attempt to conceal that we'd been poking around the ground floor uninvited. Our summer fad of pelting passing cars with jawbreaker-sized rocks has backfired badly. My father's response to our mulish and heroic refusal to acquire common sense is a darkly comic and highly obscene mixture of epithets and despairing interrogation that's often metrically pleasing. What goes through your fucking head, your brain stuck up your ass? And we can see, in the aftermath of one of our catastrophic exercises of free will, the physical toll it takes on him. For days afterwards, he's exhausted, tentative in his steps, fractionally hesitant when lowering himself into a recliner. He's too old for this. He ages while we watch. Of course, in some ways, he brings it on himself. We act up, he acts out. He loves us. He loves us, we think, when the shouting subsides. We go to bed pleased and entertained besides. Shep, don't get excited, Ida says, while he throws Tom Collins glasses against the side of the garage. At times like that, when the boys have shown yet again that they have the collective reasoning power of a squirrel, Ida placates and assumes a long view perspective, as if to suggest that we'll all chuckle over such shenanigans a few years down the road. But Shep is a long way from big picture serenity. On the day of his first heart attack, he's in the chaise lounge in the backyard, recovering from the revelation that my brother and I have been running around the summer streets at 3 and 4 in the morning, potting streetlights with our BB gun naked. The police have delivered this revelation in the middle of the night after having picked us up. We're without explanation as far as the naked part goes. Our MO is to leave our clothes on one corner or another and retrieve them on our way home. The heart attack arrives long after the verbal abuse has subsided and all is relatively calm. My brother and I have gone to the beach. My mother is in the kitchen browning meat for a sauce. All morning long, as far as Shep's concerned, he doesn't feel exactly right. Ida lends a sympathetic ear, but her capacity for alarm is muffled by her sense of his slight hypochondria. A burning, parentheses-shaped pain spreads beneath his sternum. Anxiety builds up, conjuring all sorts of scenarios. He resists jumping to conclusions. When he leans forward, the pain lances upward to the base of his throat. This is cause for concern. He has trouble breathing. He calls Ida, The grease from the beef is making a racket in the bottom of the pan, and he has to call her again. He works at Avco Lycoming Industries, marketing helicopter engines, and so just as a basic business strategy always affects a formality with strangers whom he considers to be better educated. He tells the emergency room intern that he's experiencing chest difficulties. Blood is taken, an EKG is hooked up, and medication is fed into him while we get word down at the beach. Ida thinks to call a neighbor, who trots the 5 blocks to tell us, and then is nice enough to drive us to the hospital to boot. It's the same guy who found us on his roof. When we come into the room, Ida's sitting there holding his hand, and he's chatting with the intern. He says, "Once you know it is your heart, there's a certain anxiety that takes over, and that affects the whole goddamn thing, too, you know." And then we interrupt. We take turns bending over and putting our hands behind his shoulders. The quasi-hug for the bedridden. He lies there for a while we ask various questions and joke. Ida's eyes mist up every so often. My brother asks how he's feeling, and he answers, "Not so good. I had a heart attack." After his diagnosis, he's given stuff to stabilize his arrhythmia. In 1970, heart medicine is turning a corner from the tertiary to the quaternary, and tests are not as sophisticated as they are today. Certain predilections, certain hidden weaknesses are missed. After a few days of observation, the little plastic bracelet is snipped off his wrist and he's sent home with medication. After a prudent interval, stress tests are administered. The problem of arterial blockage is addressed. But Shep's heart, that big shaky flatbed trundling us down the hill, is not all right. It goes on about its business quietly, while we go on about ours, but its business involves preparing to blow up Shep 2 more times. As a family, we resolve, with a minimum of discussion, to take it easy. No more battling of the sort that would only add to his strain. Israel and the Palestinians agree to be good. The Protestants and Catholics decide to try peace in Northern Ireland, because we love him so much, and because we cannot do without him. Our resolution holds up for a month and a half. Opportunities for strife come and go daily, unpursued. In the den one evening, after 4 hours of uneventful television watching, Shep expresses his gratitude. It's not the kind of thing that comes easily to him. And his family is genuinely touched. In early October, the party comes to an end. My brother is sent home from the shitty public high school he attends for having let his hair get too long, shoulder length, in the back. And I come home from the same educational sinkhole 2 hours later in an equally black mood. My brother accuses me, even before I set foot in my room, of having played his Elvis Bishop album. His tone is not interrogatory. I offer to let him kiss my ass. He throws me down the stairs. This time, Shep is in the hospital for 4 days longer than we expect. His face, when we visit, is gray. He talks hoarsely when he talks at all. The intravenous seems to be pulling stuff out of him rather than putting stuff in. The 3 of us, Ida, my brother, and myself, are frozen with fear. Between visits, our personal grooming habits decay. Our meals are cold cereal or tuna forked from the can at the kitchen table, our expressions ashen. We were all raised Catholic. My mother prays. When my brother and I watch movies late into the night, she's audible in her bedroom next to the den, her smoker's voice quavering through the rosary. When I finally go to bed, school is temporarily out as far as we're concerned for the duration of the crisis. I open negotiations with God. Even at 14, I feel the need to explain my previous lack of interest. And I do so by proposing that it be viewed not so much as hypocrisy as a desire not to bother him over every petty little thing. When I'm at my most honest, my formulations all express the same terror. I can't live without him. I can't live without him. I can't live without him. Has God listened? Is he affected? In that early morning delirium before sleep, I'm oddly confident. Shep always did. Shep always was. A specialist is consulted. It turns out that he doesn't like the look of things. We start bringing as gifts hefty biographies instead of magazines. Back home, nobody sleeps much. There's a lot of rendezvousing in the kitchen in pre-dawn hours. In the tossing and turning that goes on before that, I try to kickstart my sense of my own good fortune and gratitude. I make an effort to wax nostalgic about things my father taught me, without as much success as I would like. The problem is that I remember few Andy and Judge Hardy type sessions involving either me sitting still for patient instruction or him sitting still to give it. I am able to list for myself, though, some things I picked up more or less incompletely by keeping an eye on him. How to build and paint monster models. How to go easy on the glue. How to enhance the effect of the blood by limiting its splatter. Before Shep, my monsters were like late-stage Ebola victims. The isolating pleasures in general of all sorts of absorbed, small detail work. Shep has the most appealing tuneless hum in the neighborhood. It sounds like the Bridgeport version of something Tibetan. The closest facsimile I've encountered is a shtick played entirely for comedy. W.C. Fields, as ever henpecked and harassed in a service capacity, keeps some barely restrained customer waiting while humming just audibly, grubbing, 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 grubbing. We watched it together, Shep and I. He hummed as he watched, and to my delight never made the connection. We want to bring in other specialists at this specialist's suggestion. Shep is unimpressed with the idea. How much more poking and prodding do they need? Is this a conversation? This is good enough for me. Just before Halloween, it looks like he's finally going to be released. Somewhere in all the information and for their own private reasons, the doctors have noted progress. But on the morning of the big day, having shuffled over to the tiled bathroom, rolling his IV stand beside him, his family arrival an hour away, Shep knows something is wrong. His head is a helium balloon. His chest has been invaded by a plank. Sweat soaks his hospital gown before he becomes aware that he's sweating. The nurses, the doctors, he needs reinforcement. He needs to sit. As far as whatever hope he's entertaining, the bottom falls out and fears what's waiting there behind it, all the way down. He tries the toilet, but the lid's slippery and he tumbles and folds up like a camp stool. I try to imagine his next moments, alone on the floor of that actionably narrow bathroom, and something upheaves and rebels and inverts itself. Something in me that fundamentally, cowardly refuses the engagement. 30 years have passed and I'm still a timorous figure navigating a makeshift and narrow life. 30 years have passed without my having addressed my ambition to shape myself into an admirable figure in his image. My mother has lost the use of her personality. My brother's weeping has stabilized as a form of raging at himself and us. My own inventory, a meticulous examination of the barn door now that the barn is empty, reminds me that I didn't even do my best to love, whatever my best was. When exactly did their "it's good enough for me" become "I need more"? Why did we let it happen? 22 years after my father hit the flush tank and then the tile, I fell in love and got married. My wife, a good woman, believes I'm a good man. My children, 7 and 4, repair my emotions every chance they get. They're both boys. They sprawl, they tumble, they raise hell. They love me. I can see it. We had our luck and our luck ran out. We got the news when we arrived at the front desk of the hospital. My mother's knees stopped working before either of us could catch her. My brother swept his arms into the air and brought them down and cleared everything from the nurse's station counter in front of us. I gripped the counter with 2 hands like it was time to steer the lobby somewhere else and thought, what I still think now, that all along my father was right. We could fuck up paradise. We did. We have. I'll close with something of my own from The Hat and Other Sentimental Essays for My Father. And so, the title essay, The Hat. This morning, early, I walked into our backyard, not something I do much, or ever have done. First, I didn't used to get up early. In my 50s, that changed suddenly. Don't know why, it just did. I stopped being a night owl. I go to bed earlier than I used to, around midnight most nights, and consequently I wake up earlier, usually around 6 or 7. Maybe it's the other way around. I wake up earlier, so I go to bed earlier. Who knows, doesn't matter. Anyway, awake around 7, I went out and listened to the birds. Our backyard, by the way, isn't a yard. It's basically a walled patio with lots of flowers planted around it. No grass. When we bought the house, there was one plot of grass, just a strip, maybe 10 feet by 3, next to the garage. First thing I had done was to have that strip of grass pulled up and replaced with roses. I love flowers. I have no patience with grass. A promise I made myself as an adult was that I would never cut grass again, and I never have. Mowing the lawn was always a chore, and I never liked doing it. Mowing the grass was always my father's thing, never mine. He loved having a big yard. He loved mowing the grass. He had a hat just for that, a hideous straw cowboy hat, sweat-stained and misshapen from being folded and shoved in his back pocket, I suppose. Just for keeping the sun out of his eyes while he rode the mower. When he died, that hat was one of the things I threw away. Nobody was ever going to wear that hat again. I tried it on first. It was not a good look on anybody. There were plenty of things my father left behind, things invested with memory and sentiment, plenty of hats, come to that, but nobody was going to want the hat he wore for yard work. My brother gave me one of Dad's hats, actually, before Dad died. It was just this past winter, and I was back in Pennsylvania to help look after the old man in what proved to be his last illness, his last winter, his last everything. The hat my brother gave me is a good one. It is brown felt, Australian, with a broad brim and a high crown, with a thin leather bolero for a band. All I had with me was a thin stocking cap. My Texas nephews call these beanies, which nobody calls them in Pennsylvania. Nobody at the gas station knew what the kid meant when he asked if they sold beanies. They didn't stock them anyway. I gave my nephew mine. My brother gave me Dad's hat. Keep the snow off of you anyway, and it did. It's a pretty good hat, my brother told me, and it is. Should fit you, and it does. Men in my family, we all wear a big hat. When we moved to Seattle, the husband and I, we went to a nice haberdasher downtown, a hat store that's been there forever, classy. We bought pork pie hats, which we haven't now worn in years. That was the thing at the time. For that one brief moment in men's fashion, so we bought each other pork pie hats. I remember the woman who was fitting us. The beloved husband possessed a normal, proportionally handsome head, if I do say so, and so had no problem getting a good hat. Put it on his head, and done. With me, the woman had to keep stretching the damn thing. She kept putting it on my big head, and then taking it into the back to steam and stretch the thing again and again. "You got a big, narrow head," she said finally. "That's unusual." Seems that's a family trait, that big, narrow head of ours. It's spring now, so I've moved on to wearing a nice straw hat I bought at a different hat shop, gone now, but all winter in Pennsylvania, while my father was dying, and even after I got back to Seattle, I wore my dad's hat that my brother gave me. We all went bald to one degree or another, my brother, myself, and my late father. So a hat seems to be required for actual weather, snow or sunshine. We buried my father with two hats, though both just in the coffin, not on. One was a Korean War veteran's cap he'd only recently taken to wearing. His time in the Army was the least happy time in my father's life. He came quickly to dislike the military, and he learned to hate war. The war before his took his beloved older brother from him. My Uncle Dick died in the Battle of the Bulge. My dad, his parents, and his whole family never really got over that loss. Every year, on the anniversary of Dick's death and every Memorial Day for the rest of his life, my father could hardly see the day out soon enough. Never wanted to talk about it. He just went about the business of putting flowers on the family graves and a fresh flag on his brother's grave, and then waited for the day to end. This year, my brother, his wife, and my mother did the flowers and the flags together, our grandparents and theirs, aunts and uncles, all my parents' siblings, and now my dad's. We were a little surprised when my father took to wearing those veterans' caps. He usually wore a billed cap, the kind with the adjustable snap at the back to accommodate his big, narrow head. More usually, these were hats he got for free from car dealerships or farm equipment concerns. He bought some, too, with clever quips on the crown. He was given others, mostly camouflage patterns for hunting. He had hundreds of such hats. We found boxes full when he died. Man had a lot of hats. Only in the last year or two did he adopt the veterans' hats and the Korean veterans' hat in particular. He wore that whenever he went out to dinner now, which was once a week for years, every Friday. People frequently thanked him for his service when they saw it. Amazingly, it seems he liked that after all. 35 years ago, my mother announced one Friday that it was her day off. She never really took a day off. She worked when I was young, cleaned other people's houses as well as ours, cleaned college dorm rooms. We needed the money, so she worked. It was more unusual then, still. Or rather, it was meant to be. Second wave feminism, still called women's lib, was happening around then. Middle-class white women decided they were not going to be bound by traditional gender roles. Many wanted to work away from the home. It was a revolution. For poor women, maybe not so much. My mother worked. My grandmothers worked. My father's mother worked the desk of a motel when she became a widow at a relatively young age. More a matter of necessity than choice. My mother, before her marriage, worked in a dry cleaners and at a local coffee roasting plant and in a jewelry store. Later, as I say, she cleaned for other people. One day she announced that Friday was her day off and told my father he was taking her out to dinner. I went along. We had the fish special at the restaurant in the basement of Sears, I think it was. My father took her out to dinner faithfully every Friday thereafter for decades. He didn't kick, my mother used to say, with a lingering note of pleasure and surprise. When I went outside this morning to listen to the birds, I watched 2 of them run races along our garden wall. No idea what they were. Little wrens with long comical legs, I think they were. For whatever reason, they just chased each other around the wall. Made me smile. My father would have known just what they were. He would have known by their songs as well as every bird we have out here. At least he would have if they were like the birds he knew back home in Pennsylvania. He would have known the names of the trees as well, and the plants down to the weeds. He understood the world so long as there was earth under his feet. Looking through boxes of old photographs after my father died, it was clear that the old man spent most of his childhood outdoors. He and his brothers rode and raced horses and ponies. They rode and they hunted and they kept dogs. Until he was in his late 70s, he kept dogs. He kept dogs until they were too old to hunt. When the last old beagle went off and never came back, he stopped. "I'm too old to chase her," he said. And she was too old to be bothered coming back, I guess. As an adult, he worked in car dealerships and factories and was indoors most days, but only when he couldn't go out. He preferred being outdoors all his life. Even when he got too old to hunt, he'd sit on the porch, mow the grass, plant things he'd never lived to see grow. He planted most of the trees on the property. Some of those trees are taller than the house now, some of them taller yet. His general theory of gardening was to stick things in the ground, and if they grew, great, and if not, why, you plant another. He was an unsentimental gardener. He loved the spring, my father, as do I, who doesn't, come to that. But for him, it always meant he could be out in it again. Bad knees, bad heart, bad feet, none of that much mattered once the cold was over. When spring came again, and there was a sunny day, it meant he could take the little red convertible out of the garage again and take his wife for a drive. It's a generational thing, that business of just driving for pleasure. He loved cars all his life too, and he loved that little red car, the nicest car he'd ever owned, especially. No one else ever drove that car. The weather got warm enough and the sky clear enough, and he'd take the car out and wash it and shine it. And my mother knew that he meant to go for a drive. They'd tool around the country roads they both knew like the geography of their own history, and they'd look at the nice houses and the good yards with lots of new flowers, and they'd stop for lunch somewhere they'd eaten for 20 years, and they would make a day of it. He might drive the little red car when they went out to dinner on my mother's day off, but going for a drive was different. The point of going for a drive was the going, not the getting to. He loved the freedom of that. I didn't even learn to drive until I was 35. Cars were another thing like hunting and dogs and working outside that my father and I didn't really share. I'm an indoor man. I'm for an armchair and a book and eating dinner while we watch TV. My father and I did not have much in common then, save for the shape of our skulls. More than this would make it seem, but less than either of us might have wished, if I'm being honest. We were never really easy with one another, not the way he was with my older brother. When my father retired, and a bit later when my brother moved into the old house across the yard from my parents, my brother and my father became true friends. Never an entirely easy relationship for most people, I should think, father and son, but they made it work. Saw each other pretty much every day. Later still, when first one then the other became ill, they grew increasingly close. It's my brother who stayed. It's my brother who takes care. He was far more of a hellraiser than our father ever dreamed of being, and for quite a time they had, if anything, even less in common in some ways than I had with either of them. But they always had a common male language to do with all those things they both loved and understood: dogs and engines and hard work. My brother spent 20-some years in the same factory my father retired from. I was gone before any of this, first to Pittsburgh and then California and finally to Seattle. I missed a great deal, but then my father did too. My father went into the hospital at the end of last year, and my sister came home from Texas to help, and then I did too. Baudelaire says, "This life is a hospital where every patient is possessed with the desire to change beds. One man would like to suffer in front of the stove, and another believes that he would recover his health beside a window." When they told my father he had liver cancer and would die soon, all he wanted was to be home. The window wasn't enough. They brought him home, my brother and sister, and I came back. When poor people go into hospice, that means something different than it does when middle-class people do. Poor people come home. The family rents a hospital bed, an oxygen tank, order diapers from the service. The nurses come every couple of days. We changed my father's bedding. We washed him and fed him and sat with him and gave him medication every 4 hours. My mother slept in a spare room. We slept on couches and a rollaway bed in the laundry room. When we could still lift him and he could still stand, it was my sister and my sister-in-law, me and my brother-in-law and my nephews who lifted my father in and out of bed. When his feet would no longer stay under him and we couldn't move him to a chair anymore, it was my brother-in-law who lifted my father, who was not a slight man, to the end of the bed to sit up for a spell. Towards the end, that was the one thing he wanted, my father, to get up and get out of that wretched bed. It was hard to tell him that he couldn't, that he wouldn't anymore, ever again. He did not understand, and then I think he sadly did. That was hard. The nurses explained this clinically but compassionately to us all, how the body rebels at the end, how the mind's last hurrah is often expressed in this urge to be up, to be out, to be upright. All perfectly reasonable and true, I'm sure. I can be forgiven, I think, for reading more into the gesture than that. What my father, or some part of my father that still was my father, wanted was, I think, to be out. More than anything, for a man like my father to be outside was to be alive. To never go outside again meant the end, and so it was. And it was hard. My father's death was not easy. And as my mother said, it was not fair. Why should anyone have to suffer that way, she said. No answer to be had. She was right. It wasn't. I think now I might have made that moment a little better had I had the sense to hand the man his hat. Maybe, if he'd had that in his hand, if not on his big, narrow head, he might have felt some comfort in, at least, the potential of a departure back out into something better than that bed, that room, his fate. That hat was a comfort to me every day I was home, every night when I got up to smoke a cigarette on the porch. Kept the winter off me head. Kept my father close whenever I could leave his room for a bit. He might have liked to have had that hat for a minute again himself. I wish I'd thought of it at the time. It would probably have just further confused him and the whole hideous business of his dying more, but maybe he might have had another moment of, if not hope, then expectancy at least. But I didn't think of it until this morning when I walked outside and heard the birds I don't know the names of, and felt the sun come over the garden wall through trees I can't name. And then I came back inside and put on my father's hat for no good reason, and I wrote this. You're missing the spring this year, old man. And I am missing you. More than either of us might once, long ago, have thought possible. Glad we had the chance to make some of that up. Glad to have the hat. Well, enough. Happy Father's Day to all who deserve it, living and dead, present and absent. Here's to the old man. Thank you.